forum. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. The restrooms are down the hall right there. The door is open. They're on the right-hand side if anyone needs those. I know it's close to dinner time, so we have cookies and water if anyone's getting a little hungry. Also over there, we have some paper and some pens. The reason for that is we're going to give a presentation to start this off. The presentation is intended to give all the facts about the project, the Central Coast Blue Project, and rate study. And it's really to address a lot of the questions we've already received. And so hopefully we'll answer a number of your questions as well. During that, we ask that you hold your questions if you have any that need to advise through the slides or anything you brought with you that you don't think were addressed by the slides. If you'd like to write them down, that's what the paper and pens are for. So after the presentation is done, it's about a half an hour, we're going to open it up for questions. And so that's when we'll take your questions at that time. So again, if you need to write them down, we do have paper and pens available. Any questions that we're not able to get to tonight, we also welcome you to submit those either in writing, hopefully legibly in writing, or you can also email the city, and we'll try to post those as soon as we can and get answers to everyone, okay? Any questions before we get started just about the process? Okay, great. So,
is the intro to who we are?
Yes, so let me introduce, so up here we have Jeff English with the Central Coast Blue Project. He'll be here just to talk about project-specific questions. And Justin, I'm so sorry.
Pickard,
yes, Justin Pickard. He's with WSC, our consultant on the project, who can also answer more technical questions on the project. Many of you know Matt Bronson, who is our city manager, and he'll be answering more just city-based questions and some of the financial questions. We have some backup here from our administrative department or administrative services department, so she can answer more technical financial questions. I'm the assistant city manager, Kristen Erickson. I'm really just here to MC and facilitate the questions as they come up. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Justin to give a presentation on the project.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. Can everyone hear me? Am I coming through okay? Okay, thanks again. My name is Justin Pickard. I'm with Water Systems Consulting, and I'm the program manager for the Central Coast Blue Project. We always appreciate these opportunities to come before the community and talk about the Central Coast Blue Project, so I'd like to thank the city for hosting us tonight and giving us the opportunity to participate. So we'll start with some background of the project. We'd like to talk about the water supply drivers, the evolution of the program over time, the alternatives that were evaluated as part of the process. We'll present our current cost estimate along with our funding and financing plan, and then we'll also talk about the proposed Grover Beach water rates. But as Kristen mentioned, we'd like to reserve most of the time to take your questions, hear your comments, and provide that venue to answer your questions. And my hope is at the conclusion of the meeting that the folks in the audience today, members of the community, will have not only a greater understanding of Central Coast Blue, but also the urgency of the project and its importance for the city of Grover Beach. So beginning with the background, South San Luis Obispo County relies on 3 different water supplies to meet its needs. We have local groundwater from the Santa Maria Groundwater Basin. We have local surface water from Lake Lopez, and we have imported surface water from the State Water Project. And of those 3 water supplies, Grover Beach has access to 2, local groundwater and local surface water from Lake Lopez. So this slide presents Grover Beach's annual water use over about the past 30 years. Lopez water is represented by the dark blue bar, and groundwater is represented by the light blue bar. So historically, it's been a pretty even split between Lake Lopez and groundwater. And in periods where it was relatively dry, the agencies who rely on Lake Lopez had a tendency to maybe rely more heavily on local groundwater during those periods of time. And you can see that Grover Beach's water use has declined over time. In the 1990s and in the early 2000s, on average, Grover Beach was using about 2,000 acre-feet per year. And an acre-foot is about 326,000 gallons of water. So you can see in about the past 5 or so years, Grover Beach's water use has averaged about 1,250 acre-feet per year. And then the other thing that's noteworthy on this slide is that you can see about I'd use the pointer if I could, but about 8 or 9 years ago, you can see that light blue bar begin to drop off.
This is 2009.
And about shortly after 2009, that's right. And I'll talk more about that here shortly. So Grover Beach has done a tremendous job of water conservation. It's something the city and its residents should really be proud of. On average, Californians use about 117 gallons per person per day. Grover Beach residents use 66 gallons per person per day. And that represents more than a 40% reduction in the city's water use since the 2000s. And it's also worth noting that Grover Beach has already exceeded the state-mandated urban water use reductions that go into effect in 2030. And I can tell you that many agencies throughout the state are trying to figure out how they're going to meet significant 20 to 30% reductions in their water use, and Grover Beach has already exceeded that conservation target. So again, something for the city and its residents to really be proud of. But despite these successes and these reductions in water use, Grover Beach's water supplies are increasingly vulnerable to reductions in availability due to climate change and extended periods of drought. And these challenges aren't unique to San Luis Obispo County. They're not unique to the 5 cities region. Water suppliers throughout the state are trying to adapt to these changing conditions and find ways to diversify and improve the reliability and resiliency of their water supply portfolios. So Lake Lopez, last December, before this incredibly wet winter that we had, Lake Lopez was at 22% capacity. I'm sure everyone saw the news, saw the pictures of Lake Lopez. It was pretty staggering. And the county had triggered mandatory reductions in supplies for the users of Lake Lopez water. So this slide shows storage in Lake Lopez over time since that facility was placed into service in the late 60s. So the blue bars are the annual average of levels in Lake Lopez. That orange line shows the 10-year running average over time. So the important things to observe here is that general decline in lake level as represented by that 10-year running average. And you can see increasingly we're seeing those extended periods where the levels are dropping. And when the reservoir reaches 30% of its capacity, and that's shown by the yellow dashed line here, that's when the county will initiate that low reservoir response plan and begin curtailing supplies to the downstream water users. So the other source of water for Grover Beach is local groundwater from the Santa Maria groundwater basin. And when the availability of water from Lake Lopez, or local surface water more generally, both from Lake Lopez or imported surface water from the State Water Project, is reduced, the local cities, Grover Beach, Arroyo Grande, Pismo, and Oceano, they rely more heavily on local groundwater. But in 2009, seawater was detected in a monitoring well along the coast, seawater intrusion in the local groundwater basin. I'll touch on that more here in just a second. There's a group of agencies. This is the Northern Cities Management Area. It's comprised of Grover Beach, Arroyo Grande, Pismo Beach, and Oceano, and they manage municipal pumping in this portion of the groundwater basin to protect that resource. And so in response to that episode or that seawater intrusion event, the agencies, the municipal pumpers, began reducing the amount of groundwater that they were pumping from the groundwater basin. So this slide shows Grover Beach's groundwater pumping over time, about the past 35 years or so. This is, the blue bars represent the percentage of Grover Beach's legal entitlement, the percentage of water that they're pumping. And again, the trend here that's of note is that those groundwater pumping rates have reduced over time. The orange line, again, is the 10-year average, and you can see in 2009, when seawater intrusion was detected, Grover Beach, along with the other NCMA agencies, began reducing their groundwater pumping. And what they found is that even though on paper, the agencies collectively have access to a little over 4,000 acre-feet per year of water, the sustainable yield of the groundwater basin is about 25% of that, without allowing those groundwater levels to drop. And maybe one other note there, I would just encourage anyone who's interested in learning more about the groundwater basin, how it's managed, the threat of seawater intrusion, to look for one of these NCMA annual reports. They're readily available online, and they provide a wealth of information. So this slide illustrates that concept of seawater intrusion. So
it is of note that the basin, the groundwater basin in Santa Maria, is adjudicated. It's actually under court order because of overpumping. And so our ability to extract water from that basin is actually managed by a judge. And it's managed by a group of, we don't have absolute control over what goes on there. And it is closely managed every year. And that's the report that Justin was speaking about.
Thanks, Jeff. So again, this slide illustrates that concept of seawater intrusion. So groundwater is extracted through production wells throughout the groundwater basin. And if the amount of water that we're taking out of the ground isn't put back through natural mechanisms, which is primarily rainfall, the groundwater levels can drop down to an extent where that seawater begins to migrate inland. And it would contaminate that fresh water supply and render it potentially unusable for the cities that rely on it. So this slide presents Grover Beach's current water supply portfolio along with a few scenarios. So, and I should say here, the orange line depicts that 1,250 acre-feet per year of demand that Grover Beach has supplied for about the past 5 years or so. So on the left side of the screen, you can see that Grover Beach has just enough supply to meet its current demand. So that dark blue bar that represents groundwater, this reflects that 75% reduction, which the groundwater management, the NCMA, has determined is the sustainable yield. And then the remaining 800 acre-feet per so comes from Lake Lopez, the city's Lake Lopez entitlement. But when the county initiates the low reservoir response plan, when they start to reduce supplies from Lake Lopez to manage that facility, the city can start to have issues meeting its demand. So when the lake reaches 20% capacity, there's a 20% reduction. So that's what's represented in the middle bar there. There's not quite enough supply to meet the city's demand. And then on the far right, if no supplies are available from Lake Lopez and there's a full reduction, you can see there's a big gap that the city has to fill. And really the only way to do that is by increased pumping of groundwater, which we've just shown would increase the threat of seawater intrusion. And so while that might seem like an unlikely condition, the San Luis Obispo County, who manages Lake Lopez, they have a model of that reservoir. And what they showed was if we hadn't gotten the record rainfalls that we had last year, with average rainfall last year and average rainfall this year, Lake Lopez would have reached that minimum condition by July 2024. So this isn't intended to be alarmist. It's a very real scenario that the county had predicted. Again, with just average rainfall last year and this year, Lake Lopez would have reached that minimum condition, no water available by July 2024. So those rains really were a lifesaver, but it's not something that can be relied upon from a long-term water supply planning perspective. We need to do something more to improve the reliability and resiliency of our water supplies. So in that context of limited local water supplies, extended periods of drought, and the interest in a reliable local source of water, different agencies in the region began looking more closely at recycled water as a potential new source of supply. San Luis Obispo County commissioned a regional recycled water facilities plan, a strategic plan in 2014. That was followed shortly thereafter by a facilities planning study by Pismo, one by South Slope County CSD in partnership with Arroyo Grande in 2016, I believe. And then in those studies really laid the groundwork for the project that became known as Central Coast Blue. In 2017 through 2020, a groundwater model was developed and refined. We got some grant funding from the state to help make that possible. And then that was followed in 2021 by an environmental study, an environmental impact report, some preliminary engineering. And then most recently in 2022, Grover Beach, Arroyo Grande, and Pismo Beach entered into a cost share agreement. And that kind of defined what each agency would contribute to the program, the water supply benefit that they would receive from their contribution. The Central Coast Blue Regional Recycled Water Authority was formed. That's a joint powers authority that's comprised of Grover, Pismo, and AG. And then we began the final design and permitting process. So I'll come back to Central Coast Blue in just a second to provide more information on the project, but
if you could back up to the previous slide, I do want to note that throughout this process, he identified certain key moments, but there were many public interaction opportunities throughout that period of time. We went back through and quantified the number of opportunities that this was publicized and noticed for public interaction, and we had over 48 noticed public meetings where this process was started. And so this is not a new thing. We've really been engaging with the communities, the three different communities, that was a total for all three, throughout this process. So it's been quite a bit interaction throughout the process.
Thank you, Jeff. So again, as a part of the process, there were several different alternatives that were evaluated along the way. We hear a lot of discussion about additional water through the State Water Project. So again, this is State Water Project is imported surface water from the Sacramento River Delta, and that is entirely dependent on snowfall in the Sierra Mountains. So again, with extended drought conditions, climate change, that water supply is subject to the same limitations and variability as our local water supply in Lake Lopez is. If there's not snow, there's not water available through the State Water Project. So this slide shows allocations from the State Water Project over time, again, since it was placed into service in the late 60s through the present day. And that 10-year running average, again, is shown in orange here. And what you can see is just increasing variability of that supply. And before, again, the record rainfall last year, it would have been the third year in a row of a 5% allocation of water from that water supply. So of all the water that the state has committed to providing to millions of people, they were going to provide 5% of that. And that was going to be the third year in a row they had done that. State Water Project doesn't address the need for a local, resilient, reliable water supply. Conservation, we talked a little bit about that. Grover Beach, again, incredible job of conservation, as have Arroyo Grande and Pismo Beach, Grover Beach's partners in Central Coast Blue. This is not an issue that the local communities can conserve their way out of. We're already meeting our 2030 state mandated urban water use objectives, almost half of the statewide average water use, and we're still having these significant challenges in meeting our local needs for a reliable water supply. Ocean water desalination, this is something else that we hear a lot of talk about. These projects are incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to permit in the state of California. Santa Barbara has a plant they built in the 90s and got permitted, and they had the foresight, even though that plant wasn't operating for 20 plus years, they kept their permit active. And in the most recent drought, they were able to rehabilitate their facility and put it back online. That project would not be permitted today based on the technology they use. There's a big facility in Carlsbad, biggest ocean desal facility in the Western Hemisphere, 50 million gallons a day. It took them over 10 years, tens of millions of dollars to permit that facility. And they tried to do the exact same thing in Huntington Beach, and they were denied by the Coastal Commission. It's extremely challenging to permit. It doesn't protect the local groundwater basin. It's more energy intensive than the reuse of wastewater that we're proposing for Central Coast Blue. So,
And despite those challenges, the city of Grover Beach is participating in a county-wide strategy to look at desal, signed on as a participant for a desal plan for the county. So it may be a daunting, difficult task, but the county-wide strategy group is looking at it, and Grover Beach is actively participating in that in the event that that's a potential reality. So.
yes, thank you, Jeff. And production well relocation, this is something that was also looked at as a part of the groundwater modeling process. If seawater intrusion is an issue, well, why don't we just take our existing groundwater wells and move them farther inland? Will that fix the problem? Well, the short answer is no, and some modeling that was done early on in the process proved that. And then finally, the county over the years, I think, at a very high level, has looked at the concept of raising the spillway at Lake Lopez, essentially to provide more storage in the reservoir. But again, the additional storage doesn't provide a benefit if there's no rain, so it's not providing the long-term reliability and resiliency that we're looking for. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. We'll make this presentation available to everyone. But in short, Central Coast Blue, of all these alternatives, is the only one that improves water supply reliability. It prevents seawater intrusion. It protects our existing groundwater resource. It creates a new local water supply. Well, it creates a new water supply, and it's also within local control. Okay, so I'd like to just get into some more details here about the project. I'm going to try to go quickly in the interest of time, but Central Coast Blue is a regional water reuse project that creates that new local drought resilient water supply while also protecting the existing groundwater basin from the threat of seawater intrusion. As I've mentioned, this is a collaboration between Grover Beach, Pismo, and Arroyo Grande, building on a long legacy of collaboration to address regional water supply challenges, and we really believe that this project is going to provide benefits to the area for many years to come. It starts with the wastewater that we collect. In the first phase, we're focused on Pismo Beach. That wastewater is treated at their wastewater treatment plant, but instead of letting it flow out to the ocean, we're going to divert it to a new facility that will purify it, treat it to drinking water standards, and we will take it and re-inject it into the groundwater basin to create that seawater intrusion barrier and also replenish the basin. The concentrate that's produced as a part of the treatment process will be returned back out to the existing ocean outfall, and eventually that purified water that we've injected into the ground will be pumped back out and used as drinking water. And that completes the cycle and provides that new drought resilient water supply. This is, again, the slide to illustrate the concept of seawater intrusion. So if the groundwater basin isn't being replenished through natural mechanisms and we're taking more out than is going back in, we run the risk of seawater coming in and contaminating our groundwater. With Central Coast Blue, through the construction of these injection and seawater intrusion prevention wells, or the seawater barrier, we're creating essentially a curtain along the coast. And that will allow us, behind that curtain, to pump more groundwater than we otherwise would. Because we're maintaining that area of high pressure along the coast, it actually results in us being able to take out more groundwater than we're putting in. So that's what's shown here. If we inject 900 acre-feet per year of water into the ground, our modeling has shown that we can take out over 1,400 acre-feet per year. And the pie chart on the right-hand side of the screen here shows how that water would be apportioned among the partners in the project. So Grover Beach would see that net water supply benefit of about 510 acre-feet per year.
I'd like to note that the water allocation is based on what was anticipated by each agency as the amount of water that they would need in their water contingency management plan to deal with their future water needs. And so they're paying for that proportional amount of water and will receive that proportional amount of water. It was determined by each participating agency, and that also determined the cost share arrangement.
I have a few slides to show the audience where the facilities are located. At the top of the screen is the existing Pismo Beach wastewater treatment plant. They have a pipeline that goes along Highway 1, crosses Oceano Airport, and combines with their outfall. That's how their treated wastewater is currently disposed. The new advanced water purification facility will be in the southwest portion of the city, just south of Farrell, between Barca and Huber. And we chose this facility in one of the early feasibility studies. The South San Luis Obispo County CSD facility was considered as an option to co-locate our new advanced treatment facility. The issue with that facility is that it's in a flood hazard zone, and when it was recently permitted by the Coastal Commission and the Regional Water Quality Control Board, they've been given essentially a 30-year permit extension. And the expectation is that that facility will be required to move inland because of the concerns related to sea level rise and climate change. So for us to make a tremendous investment at a facility whose future was uncertain, it didn't make sense. And so we chose an alternative site that was within the city of Grover Beach. It's located somewhat strategically near that existing outfall pipeline. And that was important to us because that's the feed water to the plant. That's represented by the orange line. The concentrate that's produced as part of the process is sent back to that pipeline. That's shown by the purple line. And then the purified water that we produce will be sent to a series of injection wells that are also shown here. I'd like to just briefly share that this concept of purifying treated wastewater to drinking water standards and putting it to beneficial reuse is not new. This map was excerpted from the California Water Reuse website. This is another place that's a great source of information for those who might be interested in learning more. This shows all the facilities throughout the state who are either currently operating or projects that are in varying stages of development that are employing this concept of potable reuse, taking wastewater, purifying it, and either injecting it down into the ground or putting it in spreading basins and allowing that water to naturally infiltrate. And one of the projects I'd like to just briefly highlight, we get this question a lot, well, where has it been done in a similar sized community? So we wanted to highlight the Pure Water SoCal project, which is just east of Santa Cruz. It's being led by the Soquel Creek Water District. This project is slightly larger than ours. It's expected to produce about 1,400 to 1,500 acre feet per year of purified water. In terms of pipelines and wells, very similar. It's currently in construction, expected to be online next year. The construction cost for this project is about $145 million, and it serves a population of about 40,000 people. Okay. Just a few more slides, and I'll turn it back to you, Kristen. I wanted to just take a few minutes to talk about the project cost. So our current project cost our cost estimate is $93 million. So this slide shows how those costs are broken down by the different project components. About $40 million for the treatment facility, $27 million for the wells and pipelines, $18 million for implementation costs. So that's design, permitting, project management, construction management, environmental compliance, legal fees, property acquisition, everything falls into the implementation cost category. And then we have an $8 million management reserve that would cover unanticipated costs. This is just a quick breakdown of the costs for the treatment facility itself. Almost $3 million for the site civil work, $8.6 million for the building itself and all of the concrete tanks that will be a part of that building. $16.7 million for the pumps, the pipes, the valves, the actual water treatment equipment, and then $12 million for all the electrical equipment, instrumentation, controls, and programming. And then for the wells and the pipelines, $14 million for the injection wells, $6 million for the monitoring wells, and $7 million for the pipelines. This is our plan to fund and finance the project. 50% of the project costs are going to be funded through state and federal grants. That's our plan. So that works out to be $23 million from each source, and that remaining 50%, or about $47 million, would be financed through a low-interest loan. So we've exceeded our state grant funding goal of $23 million by $1 million. We've received $14 million in federal grants to date, and we're currently preparing an application that's due December 7th, and our hope is that we will obtain that remaining $9 million to meet our federal funding goal of $23 million. And we're continuing to look for additional opportunities to reduce the project cost through grants or refinements to the project scope. So it's something that we're keenly aware of. It's top of mind for everyone on the team to try to reduce the cost of the project to the extent that we can.
And we do feel quite confident about that $9 million grant. It is a project that it's a grant fund that's well-funded, and our project lines up very well with granting criteria and funding criteria. We're advocating for it. We qualified in the first round, and we believe quite strongly that we will qualify in the second round. That will reduce the overall cost of the project.
And this slide presents the cost share for the three partner cities of that remaining $47 million that will be financed. And this is commensurate with their water supply benefit as detailed in that cost share agreement. So $18.3 million from Pismo, $16.7 million from Grover Beach, and $11.8 million from Arroyo Grande. Okay, and then finally, the proposed Grover Beach water rates, just a few slides here, and I'll wrap up. So this slide presents for a single family resident, the bi-monthly water bill for an average residence that uses 15 HCF 100 cubic feet of water every 2 months. So this shows the current Grover Beach rate structure for that use case and the increased cost of water for the rates that will go into effect next year, as compared to other water suppliers in our portion of the county. And then the next slide shows the increase in water rates from Grover Beach for the next year for 2025. So while the rates have gone up to a little more than $140 every 2 months, the city of Grover Beach's rates are still within that bottom third or so of water suppliers within the county. And then finally in 2026, with the next rate increase, that bi-monthly water bill goes up to just shy of $180 every 2 months, but still within that lower third or so of the other water suppliers within our portion of the county. Okay, so that concludes my portion of the presentation, Kristen. I can hand it back to you.
Thank you, Justin. Just before we get started, I want to make note that this is not a time for public comment. That will be at the hearing. The public hearing is scheduled for December 11th. Decision makers, that's our council, are here to hear those comments. This is just to get your questions answered about either what you've seen in the presentation today or other questions you have about this project. I'll be fielding questions, so I'm going to ask that you raise your hand and I'll call on people so that we can get through as many as we can. We're not talking over each other. I do want to note as well, we're recording this meeting and that includes the presentation. So if you want to save your storage space or your battery life on your camera, this will be available on our website. Okay. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
How much of the $16.7 million that allocated towards Grover Beach cost sharing, how much is that for ongoing maintenance or ongoing facility management of the operation?
Sure. So the $16.7 million is just for the initial construction cost. The annual O&M cost is, I think it's approximately close to $3 million, and Grover Beach's share of that is, I believe, about $1.25 million per year.
However, I do want to note that your rate structure that was proposed by the City Council, and Jeff English with Central Coast Blue, and we'll answer questions to the extent we can regarding the rates, but may in some cases be more appropriate for the city to answer those questions. The rates that were established take into consideration not only the cost to reimburse the capital, but the ongoing maintenance and operation as well. So although that's an additional figure, it's calculated within that rate structure.
My question is, you show the sharing of the cities Is it based on population?
So I'm going to repeat the question so they can hear on the video. So the question is the cost sharing based on population of the various cities?
Population
No.
or
No, that was not based on population. It was based on the amount of water that the city of Grover Beach felt that they needed in order. If you want to go back to the slide that showed the deficit of water. So given your water supply here in Grover Beach, the water managers, those folks work for the city of Grover Beach, who calculate how much water you're going to need over time, looked at this and said, we need this amount of water in order for us to meet our water demand. It wasn't based on population. It was based on the amount of water that the city of Grover Beach felt that they needed out of this project. And so it's not based on population. It's based on their desire.
And I can add to that, having been one of the people who was negotiating that agreement, along with my counterparts in Pismo Beach and Rio Grande, the water managers, we looked at all the different variables. And given that this is new water we're putting into the groundwater basin, how much we're currently using really was less relevant than how much we need going forward for our water projection. And so in Grover Beach, we believe 36% was our number that was meeting our water needs today, our water needs tomorrow, and ultimately Pismo Beach believed 39% was their number, or Rio Grande 25%. So that's how we came up with those percentages.
I still wonder, because their
So just a
population
second,
is
everyone,
higher than
let's
ours.
make sure that we're all being respectful of each other and we're giving each other a chance. I'll let you do a follow-up, but yes, I see that there are multiple hands up and we're trying to get to everyone.
I recognize the difference in population, and I can't speak to my counterparts in Rio Grande and Pismo Beach. They have their own numbers and their own estimates. But we took a look at what our needs were, and given that we have only two sources in Lopez Lake and groundwater, we looked at where we are now, and given the prolonged drought expectations, we wouldn't have enough water to supply our community currently without having roughly 36% of this new water coming in to provide ongoing water supply. So that's how we came up with it. Again, Pismo Beach and Rio Grande had their own water calculations, but that's what we believe we needed to maintain our community needs today.
Okay, so show of hands, and I will go straight to the back there.
On the slide, can you show us where, on South Grover, where those tanks are going?
So the question is, where are the tanks going? Are you referring to injection wells?
Looks like it's right in the middle of two of my properties. It's something I don't know.
Sorry, are you talking about the injection wells?
Yes, the wells.
Okay, so where are the location of the
facility and
proposed wells?
Sure. And I apologize, I think I sped through that slide.
Yeah, you did. It went real fast.
And I think our slide is actually a bit cut off. So there's a well, you can, if you see,
Tell me where it's going, don't you know?
Let's let them respond to your question, please.
so the northernmost well, which is not shown on the screen here, you can, if you follow the blue line, it's in a parking lot owned by the city of Grover Beach, just east of the train station. So that's off screen. The next well on Farrell Road we're currently talking to the property owner at 550 Farrell. So that's injection well 2. As we travel south into Oceano, it's in the public right-of-way right next to Old Juan's Cantina. So it's going to be below ground, in a vault, within the street. The fourth well, the one that's farthest down on the screen, is going to be just west of Oceano Park, in the public right-of-way, again, in a vault below ground.
Do you have an address?
I don't.
Okay. so
Oceano Park.
If we have more detailed questions related to the specific locations and APNs and things like that, you can submit those after, but we're going to move on.
And I would add that we have contacted the property owners for those respective properties to make sure we're negotiating with them. Of the 3 that are locked in place, 2 of them are in public property, 1 is private property, and we're negotiating with that property owner right now. The one at the very end, also, that's one that is currently not in the required list of injection wells. We took that off the list as a cost savings measure because of the overall cost of the project. And so that is an optional well, the one very far south near the Oceano Airport.
Give me a street, maybe?
I don't have that.
I want to just comment that anyone who wants to stay after, if has detailed questions, I'll stay here as late as you want to answer questions. We have some detailed maps that will show you specific, we don't have the address off the top of our head. It's public property, it's not on somebody's private property who's not willing to work with us. Happy to answer your question. I don't know that off the top of my head, sorry.
Okay, I'm gonna move over here. These people had their hand up for a while.
The
Yeah.
noise level change with the purification facility.
So you're asking, what would the noise level be for the operations of the facility once completed?
Yeah, it's, I wouldn't be able to quote a specific decibel level. It's something that, as a part of our environmental review process, we were required to study that and estimate that. Our EIR is available on the Central Coast Blue website. So I can tell you that the bulk of the treatment equipment is housed inside a building expressly for that purpose, to minimize the sound and to meet the City of Grover Beach's noise ordinance.
Vibrations also.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so in the green shirt there's plaid, yeah.
So in the EIR report, it states that there's going to be exceedance of sound level, decibels, and at the end of the project, we're going to do another survey, acoustical survey, to suggest screen walls and how to mitigate that. That's in the report. Is that part of this cost, or is it just, you're just going to keep going with cost?
So I'm gonna just repeat the gist of that question, which is, there's a report mentioned in the EIR about surveying noise volume after the facility becomes operational. Is that included in the costs that are projected here?
And that may be something that we need to go back to our environmental consultant who prepared that document. It may just be due to the nature of these estimates of noise generation, if in fact they exceed what we think them to be, and our plan to keep them below the city's noise ordinance, some provisions to be obligated to come back and mitigate that in the future. So we'd be happy to follow up on that question with you with additional detail.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll send an email to Jeff, if I have his email.
Great, thank you. The woman back there with the pink shirt and black sweater?
You mentioned that there would be 4 wells there, and you were taking one out to save some money, but that is not telling us about how many injection wells, where they'll be located, and also a production well?
So I think we did go over the location of the proposed wells. Are there any that?
Yeah, we can state that again. The 3 injection wells, we described the specific locations. One is in public property owned by the city of Grover Beach. It'll take up the configuration of less than 2 parking spaces. Most of it will be underground, not even noticeable. That's one location. It's off of Grand and the end of Rockaway. The other is on Farrell. It's on private property. It's on the back of a private property lot, and that will be out of the public right-of-way. And then the third one is located, I believe, on a...
Yeah, I think the cross street is Monroe, North Swing and Monroe. If
My
folks,
question was about the monitoring wells, not the
monitoring
injection
wells.
So-
I realize you answered.
Okay, the
that.
question is then locations of monitoring wells for the project.
Yeah, I think we have a slide kind of in the back here with some more detailed information about our. Okay. Well, I apologize. I thought we had monitoring wells on this slide, but it appears that we don't. So we may need to follow up with you with some additional information on those locations.
So, and again, these will be posted. Any questions submitted today that cannot be answered, we will get answers and post them to our website.
How many monitoring wells will we need?
5, and they are included in the environmental impact report. So that information is publicly available. We're showing the preferred locations of those wells and the alternate locations for those wells. But I think they're, for the most part, in public right-of-way. And then you mentioned the new production well for the city of Pismo Beach. That will be co-located with the advanced treatment facility. or the AWPF, so it will be on that property in Grover Beach.
Which Pismo Beach is paying for, is because ultimately that is part of their well and their water operation.
Okay, I'm going to go to the back over there.
Hi, I just want to make a different statement.
I'm sorry, so if you have a question, we're happy to answer questions. Again, this is not a time for public comment.
How can you compare our town with an income of 77,000 median income to a town that has over 107,000 income as your project? They have industry up there, we don't have. We're not a rich town. It just seems to me like we're being used by Pismo and Arroyo Grande so they can do more construction.
Okay, so I think the question is, is it a false comparison that we showed earlier when we were talking about similar project?
I think that the question that we were asked, have been asked in the past, is this a new, untried technology? And so we tried. I understand that her question now. I'm providing some preface to our response. So in response to the previous questions that we have had, which were, is this a new technology? Has this been done before? Are we the guinea pigs? So no, we compared it to SoCal, which has a very similar project. This technology is tried, it's been tested, it works as a groundwater barrier. So that was why we brought forward SoCal as an example. We were not in any way comparing our cost of living here or their affluence. That wasn't my intent. And so there are certainly differences between folks who live in the Bay Area and Southern California and us. So I think I can't speak to that.
Now that you have a week since I heard you speak at the MLS meeting, to go and look at Cal Matters report that just came out last
So,
month.
okay, we're going to move to the next question
Wait a
because,
second.
so I'm sorry, ma'am, we're not here to hear public comment. So if you would like to make your public comment, the time for that is the December 11th hearing. Today, we're here to answer questions.
I've been asking and I haven't gotten the answer. Have you reviewed that just came out? And how can we be compared to 500,000 people, 40,000 people? That's the question.
Brenda, I would say we've compared to a 40,000 person project just in this example that I think is a relevant one that ultimately is sized in a way that is comparable to what we're looking at. So this is a comparison. They're about a year ahead of us. Brenda, please.
The amount of money people make in those towns.
I would, to that question, I hear what you're saying on that point. I would also say again that this is a regional project. This is not just a Grover Beach project.
We're not a region. This is three towns. A region is a community.
Brenda, let me finish, please. We looked at this. Brenda, please. We looked at this 7 years ago as the drought was really gripping in 2016. And I was appointed city manager. Council was contemplating emergency water supplies because we had no other sources. It hadn't rained for years. This project came about because this region has known water shortages more often than not, and 3 communities banded together to look at how we could do this in a way that protected our groundwater basin and protected our largest water source. We didn't take a look at what this community was making. What this community was making, we took a look at what we needed as 3 communities together to provide enough water source to help carry out our community needs today. A year ago, we were contemplating up to 50% reduction requirements because of where Lopez Lake was. And I asked people to think about if your household had to reduce by 50%, what would that look like? What would a business look like if they had to reduce by 50%? How would they stay afloat? How would they stay serving customers? That's the scenario that we were contemplating only a year ago and having some very drastic conversations around that. So this project really came about because of our need as a region, not just Grover Beach, not just Pismo Beach, not just Arroyo Grande, but as 3 communities, and how we could take control of our water destiny here in a way we've never done so before. And trying to do so in the most cost-effective way possible, realizing that there will be added expenses that we're having to undertake as part of this project. So to us, Soquel Creek is a good comparison because of what they are doing, the size of the area, the fact that they're about as grant funded as we are. We're learning from them and gleaning information from them. And hopefully we can really apply what they've been doing in a way that meets our needs here in our community.
Is the SoCal Creek operational?
It's under construction right now.
It's under construction, so that's what we're using
It's
as
one of
our
those
basis
black
for
ones.
whether this works or not, and it's not operational.
Yeah.
It's still under construction, it's still basically like where we're at. I mean, it's
about a year ahead of us in the process.
It's
that's
not
right.
actually functioning to show that it is.
There are groundwater injection projects to cause groundwater or seawater intrusion throughout the state. There are a number in Southern California. The technology works. Yes.
Okay, can I see
So
hands
those-
for people who have questions
the-
right there? Then
I have two questions. First, you mentioned that there's 48 previous meetings about this. Which of those meetings was the cost of $93 million disclosed? 'Cause I believe that was 3 meetings ago.
So, yeah, at which meeting or meetings did we disclose the 93 million estimated cost of construction of the facility?
I think the first time that we updated the project cost was June of last year, June 2022. And that was really in the wake of all the really extreme economic conditions that had been experienced across the state, supply chain shortages, inflation, labor shortages. We recognized the need to revisit the cost estimate. The scope of the project had evolved through the design process, and so that was something that was important to Grover Beach and the partners to take another look at those costs and update them.
And that was at the joint councils meeting, so all 3 cities.
So to state that, that people weren't involved or up in arms when the cost was amazingly less, is an unfair classification of the city, the residents of the city of Pismo Beach, or Grover Beach, because it wasn't until this large cost and these huge compounding increases in water rates came to full fruition with a $93 million price tag that you can even begin to really judge citizens' involvement, because if this was a $24 million project, we probably would have been all for it.
Okay, can I see a set of hands again for next, we're going to move on to gentleman in the back who has not asked a question yet.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. One is the slide that had the timeline, and it had, like, we did this study in this time, and we formed this joint deal. Is there one location where I could find the studies and the modeling and all the items on that slide?
So just
like a clearinghouse in one spot?
Yeah, to repeat, is there a place where we can find all of the past meetings and studies that are included on the timeline that was shown on this presentation?
Many of the reports are on the centralcoastblue.com website. If there's a specific report that you're thinking of that's not on there, contact me directly. I can point you in the direction. It's either on the City of Grover Beach website or the Central Coast Blue website. There's an education library, a list of reports on that site.
Cool. And then my second question
So
is...
I'm going to move on and just want to get other people as well. If we have time, I will come back to those 4 to answer questions. Anyone who has not asked a question yet? Okay. Sir, right there.
I'd like to know, how much is your phase 2 going to cost?
So the question is, if we were to move forward with phase 2, what are the estimated costs of that?
We do not have a cost for phase 2. We know it will be less. Phase 2 involves taking water from South County Sanitation District and piping it back to the advanced water treatment facility. The water treatment facility, purification facility will be sized to accommodate that in the future, should it be desired. But it's not contemplated at this time. At some point in the future, should policymakers need additional water, it will be an option. It's not even considered to be constructed at this point. We haven't invested in time and effort into determining what that cost will be. It's not relevant to what we're doing. The project phase 1 is a standalone project and independent of phase 2. And at some point in the future, it may be necessary and may be needed, and we will be able to accommodate that if that's the case. But we don't have a cost estimate for that other than, because we don't know when that will be constructed, and it'd be speculation, pure speculation on what that cost might be.
Okay, show of hands again. Okay, go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Jeff, what's his last name? English?
English, yes.
Jeff, you put together a memorandum back in June, some scoring criteria. You say in here that the microfiltration probably will handle most of it, but there may be a need for additional pretreatment via ozone or other means to reduce total organic carbons and/or nitrate concentrations. Is that included in this 93 million?
I'm not familiar.
The memorandum that you wrote to the city council in June, scoring criteria regarding
Can you-
grant. Yeah, I can.
Can we move on to that question?
Yeah, we'll move on and we'll come back to that if that's all right, so he can read it. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Would it be possible to go back to the slide that showed the rates relative to the other cities?
Sure.
That would be done. Okay, so when you sent it through the first time, I noticed the timeline, can you bump it up to the next one? Because you stopped at 2026 last time with the slides. And these, from what I understand, our rates are scheduled to go up through 2028.
So the question here is, why aren't we showing where we would land on the rates beyond 2026?
And I get that question. When we look at comparisons, we always look at where other communities are in their rate structure. Every community has a different schedule for their 5-year rate structure. Pismo Beach and Dover Beach are on the same schedule right now. Rio Grande is a year behind us, so they'll be updating their rates in fiscal year 26. Other communities are on different schedules. So I asked our finance director to take a look at where communities are now, and they're going to be changing over time. What we see is that in fiscal year 26, a number of communities are going to be updating their rate structures. So we don't really know what their structure will be in fiscal year 27 or 28. In fact, AG, while they are behind us in this particular analysis, they're updating their rate structure in this year. So they could very possibly go above Grover Beach because of where they will be and looking at their own needs and their own requirements in 2026.
So that's not really right.
But that's not, yeah, but if we've updated it to what we know, the only thing we know is what our rates would increase to. We don't know what they're, if we go to what we know our rates would increase to, we'd be well ahead of where they're at.
This is based on what the approved rate structures are in the other communities through 2026.
But what about what you're asking to approve? What is it gonna be at the end of the 5 years? Why are we saying that?
We'll be updating this for 27, 28 as part of the updated materials. I would, just based on where we are here, where we are in still below average, we would anticipate we would still stay somewhere around the average mark by those 2 years. Year 5 is a 4% increase that is contemplated in rate structure. And what I also mentioned, just as a point of information, what the council will be considering in December is a rate structure. The council is not considering locking in what the rates are for years 2, 3, and 4. That is something that the council will do every year. The rate structure is essentially a ceiling above which the council cannot go, but the council can always enact a lower rate. And our city council has done that previously. In 2017, the council at that time adopted a 70% rate structure over 5 years. Ultimately, the council enacted about 55% because they provided direction to staff to come in with lower rates to change funding expectations. And I would anticipate our council will be looking to do that as well. And given the grants that we're looking to apply for, if we get additional $9 to $10 million in federal grants, we definitely will be able to bring in a lower rate in the future years.
So why don't we wait till then?
So just to be clear,
Why don't we wait till
what the council will be considering is approving a rate structure. The council is not locking into what those rates would be every single year going forward, but to be conservative, typically a rate structure will not assume money that's not in hand yet. It will assume what's in place right now. If additional money comes in, additional grant money comes in, project costs are lowered, then lower rate increases would certainly be considered by the council, and I would anticipate our council to be very clear.
Why don't we consider the higher rates later on and see what happens?
The challenge is that the project construction is is scheduled to begin next summer. And so the initial rates are needed to be able to bring in the funding to begin this project now, so that in 3 years, it can be producing additional water for our community.
Sounds like you already
That's
started
the
it, though. It sounds like you already bought land, you started this thing.
The project has been going for the last 6 years. We have put money in our budget each year that the council has approved for the pre-construction amounts for design. The council and each of the 3 cities has approved a cost sharing agreement. Councils have approved the joint power authority. So it is an approved project that each of the cities has already enacted. What is not in place yet is the funding to actually build it, to go into construction. So that's something that the elected representatives over the last 6 years have put in place, have taken actions to advance this project forward. Grover Beach has spent about $2.5 million in the last 6 years. All money has been budgeted, approved by the city councils, put into our capital improvement programs. Rio Grande and Pismo Beach have done the same thing. So now this is the next step, actually bringing the project into construction, and for that, additional funding is needed.
Okay, I had a few hands up that I do want to get to.
We can respond.
Oh, you
Thank
have
you.
a-
And
okay,
your
so-
name again?
Charles Tinmore.
Charles, thank you. So that information that you provided was supplemental information. I did forward information that was prepared by somebody else. I didn't draft the information in that packet. It was actually prepared by somebody else. I forwarded to the city council for their information. And it regarded some responses that raters who were rating a grant had made comments on their review of our grant application. So that's all that information. The information that was in that was actually crafted by those raters and not us. I didn't even read the information that was within what you had. I forwarded information on for them as part of a package.
Can you answer that then, my question?
I think I can try. So as Jeff mentioned, we've been aggressively pursuing grant funding. So this was a grant that we had applied for through the State Water Resources Control Board, Proposition 1 groundwater grant. So as a part of our grant application review, the state had a number of technical reviewers to look through the merit of our application. So they had identified questions or potential, I guess in their opinion, gaps in our application. And the challenge is the guidelines for the grant application are very limited. The amount of space you have to explain something as complicated as we've spent the last hour talking about is a real challenge. And so your question was, they highlighted, might we need additional treatment to address these constituents of concern? And the short answer is no. That's not currently contemplated. We piloted this process several years ago for an extended period of time at the Pismo Beach wastewater treatment plant on the actual water that we'll be treating. And the results of that pilot test did not indicate that we would need any additional treatment that's being discussed here.
Okay, I'm going to go to the back.
When you say wastewater, I do plumbing, are you talking toilets?
Yes.
So, yeah, the question is, where's the source of the wastewater?
So
The difference between gray water and wastewater?
Sure,
Yes.
the project will take water that is treated from wastewater treatment plants. So it's water from homes that goes to a wastewater treatment plant. It is treated to a secondary quality that's approved by the state to divert into the ocean. Through an advanced water purification process, which has been in place throughout the world for many years, we are now treating that water, and the state approves it for being injected into the ground. Once it's purified, many people will actually drink it, and I've seen it and I've done it, drank that water before. In this case, it'll be injected into the ground as a plume of fresh water to prevent seawater from intruding into. So we're not plumbing that to go back into your house. But yes, it is wastewater. To answer your question, yes.
The question is does anything continue to go into the ocean?
Sure, I mean, are you reclaiming all the wastewater, or how do you divide it?
So it's treated through an advanced water purification process, and there will be some portion of that water that's filtered out. when you have an RO system in your house, there's certain things that, the RO will flush out that you're not going to drink. Same thing here, certain amount of that purified water will be put back into an outfall and sent out to the ocean. So, that this is many millions of people drink water that's purified wastewater. It is the way that we're getting new water sources. If we haven't done it yet, we will do it in the future, our county, so.
Wouldn't gray water make more sense?
Okay, so we're gonna move to
Sewage
some,
going to sewer?
gentleman over here, thank you.
I just want a clarification on something I think I heard. This project is already approved and it's gonna go forward no matter what the people say. Did I hear that?
So the question is this project is approved, does that mean it's going to go forward no matter what?
So the project has been entered into through actions of the three city councils and formed a joint powers authority. What is necessary now to actually make this a true project that is operating is additional funding for construction and operation, and those have not been approved. What's been approved, what's been budgeted and spent is pre-construction costs and design costs and other expenses, all of which have been approved by the city councils in their role.
If you can find the funding, it's going forward no matter what.
Everything's
Ultimately, we have some decisions coming into us, and I don't want to speculate too much on what ifs. Ultimately, what is necessary to actually make this a project that is operational and producing water is additional funding for construction. Again, half of it's grant funded, half of it is low-interest loan paid for by local ratepayers, in Grover Beach, Arroyo Grande, and Pismo Beach. And ultimately, that's what's necessary to make this a true project.
Okay.
Okay, so right here.
I just have a question kind of on how we got here. So we saw that Grover Beach has been creating conserving water, and we are. I just put in a sod lawn, artificial turf lawn, so that's great. So the last 10 years that Grover Beach has been conserving water and preserving our water, our community, our neighbors have been adding hundreds of hotel rooms and hundreds of new housing and not preserving our groundwater, which has put Grover Beach in a position where we have to bear the burden of supplementing their TOT tax and their higher property taxes they get. And I wonder if that was ever taken into consideration when the funding costs went into effect, that how many hotel rooms were added in the last 5 years when we're in this massive drought. And we can't control what other cities do, I understand that, but was it considered when we looked at who should pay the burden for using the water? And mind, there's a drought, but there was use. They're overusing and we're saving, and now we have to pay for their improvements to their city, which they get tax dollars on and we don't.
So I think to distill that question down, how do we allocate the water in the basin, and what impacts does it have if other neighboring cities use more than we do? Does that affect our allocation, and did we consider that?
I can attempt to answer that. I can just say we described this agency, the Northern Cities Management Area, the NCMA, and that's comprised of Grover Beach, Arroyo Grande, Pismo Beach, and Oceano. Those are all the municipalities who pump from this portion of the groundwater basin. And as everyone was pumping, and they're only legally able to pump up to their entitled amount. And as Jeff described, that's been established by the court. That's what's referred to as the adjudication. So everybody was staying within their legal entitlement to that groundwater that was established by a judge.
And they still are. So.
And they still are. And when it became known that that amount of pumping was not sustainable, when seawater intrusion was detected along the coast, all four of those agencies voluntarily reduced their groundwater pumping by 75% to try to mitigate that threat of seawater intrusion, and that's been consistent to date since 2009. So,
How is Pismo funding? I mean, how are they flushing toilets in those hotels if they're not? I'm trying to make it make sense in my head.
Sure. Matt, the city of Pismo Beach also has water supply that we don't have, and so that's why the city of Grover Beach needs a more stable supply. And so they cannot take your water. They don't have a legal right to any of your water. And our request is independent of what Pismo Beach is doing.
And just, if I can add to that, I hear you on your question. I hear you on what you're saying regarding other communities, and I don't want myself as city manager to make too many comparisons myself in other communities. What I would say is our demand historically has been 1,250 acre feet the last several years. What has kept me up over the last year was, what if we couldn't meet that demand? What if we can only meet 1,000 acre feet in supply because we had such depleted Lopez resources and groundwater resources? That's my urgent need. Regardless of what happens on the cliffs, regardless of what happens in the village, if we can't meet that demand, we have draconian reductions that we have to consider as a community. So that was really what led us as staff, and ultimately the city council approved the cost sharing agreement to say we need 36% of this new water to meet our needs in Grover Beach, to meet our residents' needs. Our conserving residents who have done an amazing job in conserving, we need that water to sustain our community today and to allow us to continue to provide water supply down the road. I understand the comparison, I do. I'm looking at what we need in our community and how this project can help us.
Okay, yeah, in the front here.
So when you factored in how much we needed, that 36%, and you're saying that we can't support, that's just to support what we're already taking or requiring. So that means you didn't plan for any development. We're not gonna have any additional development in this community. Because you're saying that our current requirements take 36%.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Ann. So what is baked into our what's called urban water management plan that kind of projects what our needs are today and what they are going forward? It's a 25-year plan. And our build-out number that we have as part of the San Luis Obispo Council of Governments, that every community has a number based on the growth projection, is roughly 15,000 people by 2045. We're at 13,000, so an increase of 2,000 people over a 20.
You meant 15,000 more.
No, sir. 15,000 total population in 2045. So that's about 2,000 more people. It's a growth rate of about 0.5 percentage point a year if you annualize that over a 25-year period. That's what our number is by 2045. And so when we looked at our projections, we projected out, and yes, Central Coast Blue, the 325 acre feet roughly we get, that is built into that projection. So as there is new growth within that build-up projection over the next 25 years, that's part of the equation as well. So that is part of it. But I looked at the 2025 numbers, and if we didn't have Central Coast Blue, and we had prolonged drought, we would have not enough water to meet our current community's needs. And that's what is driving the timing of this, having new water within 3 years, so that if we have another drought in the near term, we have the water to be able to give people, families, and our businesses today.
Okay, in the back.
Well, Monday night, KCOY, the news said they're working on desalination from the ocean. Oh, you know about it. Well, should we wait and see what they do and not do all this $100 million?
Yeah, so the question is, shouldn't we be looking at the existing desalination project in the county? And why shouldn't we wait for that before doing this project?
Ocean's right there.
And Mr. English mentioned earlier that the city of Grover Beach is part of the county desalination study effort, and that is an important effort. It has a 20-year plan.
They're moving on it now, they said.
But it's a 20-year horizon from when they can actually get that built. Our challenge is if we have a drought in 2 or 3 years.
You're very pushy on this blue water thing without even thinking about what I just said.
It will be
a lot of ifs. I've been here my whole life, 63 years. Lopez filled up in 1 year, they thought it'd take 10. We've been in droughts before. You just said we did really good, 42%, we were really good conserving, we're getting punished for it.
Desalination is part of our long-term water future.
I know.
And we are part of that. The challenge is...
So you want to spend an extra $100 million?
Sir, if I can finish, please. The challenge is that it doesn't provide us water immediately in the drought conditions.
Well, yours
that-
doesn't either.
3 years, it'd be providing water.
15 acre feet? You kidding me?
Okay, so.
Matt, if I could respond, what was on the news the other night was that the county just received a $500,000 grant. It's a planning grant, and so that planning grant has a horizon of 5 years. So what they talked about on the news was that, yes, the county was successful in getting a $500,000 grant, which is wonderful. It's going to have an impact of having a study done in 5 years. That's just a study done in 5 years. We did discuss the potential that desal may be an option in the future, but it won't be done in 5 years. The planning study will be done in 5 years.
Okay, in the corner here, and then I'll go back to.
Why aren't they pulling more, or allocating more from Lopez? It's a foot from the overspill, and we're going to go into another water year, another rainy year in November already. Why aren't they pulling more from?
The spillway, yeah.
So why isn't the county increasing our allocation from Lopez Lake?
We're at another reservoir.
Yeah. Our water demands are certainly met right now. What this project will do is those years where it goes down, it will provide stability in those years. We had a very fortunate wet rainy season. All the reservoirs throughout the state are full. That is essentially, our region is arid. It's mostly drought and punctuated by some heavy rainy times. This will provide some stability in those drought periods.
That's not really what I asked. What I meant was, can't you turn the pumps off in the groundwater wells and just pull from Lopez? We got a lot of water in Lopez, can't we just turn, they're not falling down the water table in the pumps, in the groundwater, can't we just draw more water from Lopez?
Sure, and I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question.
That's right.
Maybe you can address that. That water, groundwater migrates out, and we're not the only user in groundwater. So ag is probably the largest user of groundwater, so, but.
That answers that.
Yeah, I think,
That's answered.
I think generally speaking, in wet years, and Matt, I don't want to speak for the city of Grover, but I think when there's readily available supplies in Lopez, folks may turn off their wells and rely on that resource, but it's also a bank for the next dry period. So we get rain and the groundwater levels rise. You have to decide which source you want to rely on more heavily.
Thank you.
Okay.
So, sir, right there.
My question to you is if the city of Grover Beach community and stakeholders decide that this is not, that they would not like to move forward with this project, what's the next steps? What happens?
Okay, so if the council does not approve the rate structure or otherwise does not approve moving forward with this project, what would be our next steps as a community?
So if either the Prop 218 protest meets the threshold or the council decides not to go forward, then that will trigger a conversation with the other partner agencies. That will be a Central Coast Blue Joint Powers Authority Board conversation about where we go from that point. And I can't speculate further from there, but that is ultimately what we have to do.
And the second part of that question, have you had those conversations with those agencies in the event that this doesn't happen?
We're all tracking this process very, very closely.
Come on, come on, come on.
You know, there's a lot of work being done on the planning, on the implementation. We have a grant that we're applying for here in a few weeks. This process is really important. This is the Grover Beach process. Pismo Beach had its own rate structure process a few weeks ago. We're all kind of moving forward in where we are right now, and ultimately, the city council will be considering action on the 11th. We have a community legally required noticing and protest process pursuant to state law that we're working in right now, and that's our current focus.
And my third part of this question.
Sir, I'm gonna have to move to some other folks for this. He's got great questions. We do have we're well over time now, and we're gonna have to cut it off pretty quick. So I will.
I'll grant you your.
One quick. It's got to be quick. We need to move on to some other folks who haven't had a chance yet.
But you're willing to stay here all night, then?
I am.
That's what he said.
And I'm sure Matt is too.
Yes.
He's used to this. So, gosh. Move on and I'll come back to you.
Okay, the woman there in the green sweater.
It's actually my neighbor, he's elderly, and he had a question, this is not about the rates, but he wanted to know what is going to happen to the recycled water year after year as it goes back into the aquifer? If they put the water back in, will it affect the aquifers for good?
Okay, so the question is, what's the impact of injecting the purified water into the aquifer? And what's the long-term impacts for that?
As you might imagine, it's a highly regulated process. So we have to coordinate with the local regulatory body, who is the Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board, and they have a series of requirements related to the introduction of that purified water into the local groundwater basin, and they require you to perform what's called an anti-degradation study, which looks at the existing water quality in the ground as compared to what you're putting into it, to prove to them that you're not going to introduce something that's going to degrade the water quality. So we've gone through that process, and that study has been reviewed and approved by the regional board.
Thank you. In the back, Ms. Auer.
Can the community of Grover Beach come back to the board and say, stop the Blue Project, let's revisit it, let's see if there's other options, we're in a bad economy. I know we're on a roll to get it done, but now that there's so many questions and the price has gone up so much, do we, the community, have a chance to come back and say, Gizmo, AG, you go do what you want, we want out of it?
So the question is there an opportunity for the public to speak to the council and get the council to not approve this project going forward at this time?
Ultimately, I would say that is something that we brought to the public hearing on December 11th. That is the city council's action in considering this rate structure. Our city council listens to the community, and ultimately those comments can be shared with the council directly. I would add that we couldn't do this project on our own. And so ultimately, if there is a project, it's one that cannot be done by any single agency.
Matt, don't lose any more sleep. Our lake is full, God's taking.
Okay, yes, right there.
What is the cost per acre foot?
Okay,
The water coming from this project?
what is the estimated acre foot cost for the water for this project?
It ranges on, as we described in one of the slides, we realize more of a water supply benefit, what we can take out of the ground as compared to what we put into the ground. So depending on how you want to do that math, it's anywhere between about $4,500 an acre foot and about $7,200 an acre foot.
So we'll say 72.
Okay?
It's a range.
Yeah.
If the community decides not to go ahead with the project, what is the estimate, just a rough estimate of the cost to us as of now?
So if the are you asking if the protest is successful?
Yes.
Then what's the cost of what? I'm sorry.
Of what you've already done.
Of already sunk costs for the city.
Yeah.
For the Grover Beach.
For Grover Beach, we've spent $2.5 million in the last 6 years in the design and pre-construction. All of that has been, again, budgeted and adopted as part of the council's process. So that's what we spent today.
Okay.
I want to note on that, so that work has gone into purchasing property, its value, it's gone into plans, and things that are not wasted. What we will lose if we don't move forward is the potential loss of significantly half of the project in grant funds. If we don't move forward, we may lose the grant funds, and then we would have to cover the entire cost ourselves. There may be grants in the future. I just know that the grants that we have secured, this project moving forward is essentially a 50% reduction in costs based on grants from the state and the feds. So we're getting a bargain in terms of the cost because of the fact that this is covered by grants. If we move forward if we discontinue the project, we have a risk. We have a risk of losing that funding and may have to move forward on our own without those funds.
Okay, right there.
So this, just to clarify, this whole protest vote that's going on, this is basically a protest of the rate structure that's been proposed. Not the actual project itself necessarily, but it's basically the community deciding if that particular rate structure meets our needs. And
So the question is, the protest process going on right now is just with respect to the rate structure that has been proposed, not to the project itself.
Yeah, and thank you for asking the question. That's an important question to address. Every 5 years, we take a look at what our water and wastewater system needs are, the operations, the maintenance, future needs. We need to make sure we have ample reserves to help with uncertainties. And then we put the numbers together and propose a rate structure that meets all those different needs. Central Coast Blue is a significant driver of these future rates. However, there are other projects also included in the rate structure, from improving our reservoirs over on Hillcrest on the far eastern side of Grover Beach, to meter reader systems, to lift stations. There are a whole number of different projects that are part of this rate structure, along with the operations and maintenance of our current system. We have, we've been upsizing water mains for the last several years so that the 2-inch and 4-inch water lines are upsized to 6-inch and 8-inch water lines. So all that's included in the rate structure. And yes, the Proposition 218 process by state law for property-based utility rates is an opportunity and a right for property owners to receive a notice that the City Council will be considering this structure at a duly noticed public hearing. And property owners, customers of record for that property have the right to protest that rate structure. They can do so by any means, any written means. They can give us a napkin, they can give us a form, they can give us a letter, and ultimately we tally those. And if there is 50% plus one, so a simple majority of properties protesting that rate structure, then the council cannot consider action. It takes that action away from the council. If there's not a protest, then the council can consider the action like they would do any other action before the council. That's how the Prop 218 process works. It's similar for garbage rates. Every community has garbage rates that have the same process. So it's property-based utility rates, and that process comes from state law.
Okay, right here, sir.
Which leads me to a question, and it does have merit to it. You're talking about utility rates, you're talking about these water rate increases over the next few years, with phase 2 probably being increased even further down the road. Has there been any kind of economic feasibility type study as to whether or not this community can even pay those rates, in addition to all the other inflationary pieces that we're experiencing right now?
It's all going to take power. Power rates are going to go up.
Well,
and I'm serious about that question. I mean, I think there are enough community members that are struggling right now that this could really be very, very difficult for them, especially as we look down the road.
If you cut the water off, you can't survive.
And if we don't have enough water supply, then we also have significant costs as well. But I understand the question, Mr. Chan. I understand the question about the challenges of looking at this long-term rate structure and what would be enacted if that was enacted as included in the current rate structure. And that is something that is very, very sobering. It's something that is very difficult to contemplate and look at. Ultimately, the challenge is all of our local communities are grappling with this infrastructure. Sir, if I could please finish? We're all grappling with these different system needs and infrastructure needs, and ultimately what our ability to pay for them. We haven't done a specific economic impact analysis as you're describing, just to answer that question.
Why are you doing the project,
sir?
If you don't have an answer to that.
If I could please finish? I would add that we have a subsidy discount program that the council put in place 2 years ago. We're one of 2 cities in the county that do this, and the council has asked us to expand and augment that program with additional funding.
Okay, so I'm paying because you can't afford it, so you get a grant, but so I'm paying. So again, I'm paying. So I don't mind lifting up my neighbors, but that, not everybody.
So where does the funding come from? Is it also from ratepayers?
It comes from the general fund.
Yeah, which comes from my taxes.
TOT, hotel taxes, sales tax, comes from
How
tax
many
revenue.
hotels do we have in Grover Beach? That's really not that really doesn't.
So we have time for just one more question. We do need to let staff go. So I'm going to go to the front here because you have not asked a question yet.
I want to talk about seawater intrusion. We have two sources of water in Grover Beach, Lopez and our wells. If we get in a severe drought situation and our wells become contaminated with seawater, that's it. You can't flush them back with fresh water and get rid of that. Is that correct?
So are the impacts of seawater intrusion, once it occurs, irreversible?
Not necessarily. What we've seen in other instances, like in Southern California, for example, they in the 40s and 50s in the LA area, they experienced this exact same issue. They were relying on groundwater. They overpumped. There was seawater intrusion. Ultimately, they made an investment in a project to construct seawater intrusion wells, a barrier, put that barrier into service, and what it did was essentially stranded a plume of brackish salty water inland behind the barrier. So now what you see in many locations in Southern California, they're constructing groundwater desalters to try to pump down that plume of salty water to get it out of the basin and clean it up. So it essentially becomes a cleanup project. It is reversible, but at great expense.
At great expense. So Southern Coast Blue would negate that also.
It has the potential to prevent that from happening, yes.
Okay, thank you all for these amazing questions. We are going to cut off the recording at this point, and we're going to end the full public meeting. But some of our staff will be sticking around to answer any other questions you may have. Again, you can also feel free to submit your questions in writing either to gbadmin@groverbeach.org or here today if you can write legibly. We will be posting those questions and answers to those questions as we're able to provide them on our website. Any other?
I just thank you all for being out here tonight. I know this is a tough matter for all of us, and we wanted to provide more information and address as many questions as we can. If there are others, again, I'll stay here. Mr. English, Mr. Pickard will stay here, and we'd be glad to field your additional questions.
Thank you.
Sure. Jeff, thank you. We're here to do what we can and to do. So I have.